For generations, Europeans repeated a seductive claim. Somewhere in South America stood a city so rich that gold was ordinary. At the center of that rumor was a ruler known as El Dorado, the Golden One, said to cover his body in gold dust before entering a sacred lake. But right away, we need to separate image from origin. El Dorado first referred to a person in ritual context, not a city of glittering streets. The city idea came later, built through retelling, exaggeration, and imperial desire. Once that shift happened, the story became politically useful. A person in a ceremony does not justify conquest. A hidden metropolis of wealth does. That difference mattered, because it transformed a culturally specific tradition into a continental target for extraction. El Dorado then spread through soldiers' reports, colonial letters, investor hopes, and rival empires competing for advantage. The legend survived not because evidence was strong, but because incentives were. If you were a crown official, a captain, or a financier, belief in hidden treasure turned risk into plausible strategy. And as often happens, the people with the least power paid the highest cost for narratives they did not create. The story's historical core points to the Muisca, an indigenous society in the highlands of present-day Colombia. They were skilled in metallurgy, social organization, and ritual life, and gold in their world carried religious and symbolic meaning more than market value in the European sense. During leadership transitions associated with the Zipa, accounts describe ceremonies involving offerings at Lake Guatavita. The famous image is of a newly installed ruler covered in fine gold dust, accompanied by attendants and valuables presented to sacred waters. Whether every colonial detail is exact, the broader point is clear: Europeans witnessed or heard of real ritual use of gold. Instead of asking what the ritual meant within Muisca cosmology, many asked how to locate and seize its source. This is where misunderstanding became structural. A ceremonial concentration of precious objects was treated as proof of limitless reserves. Spiritual offerings were read as surplus inventory. Symbolic wealth became imagined monetary wealth waiting to be mined. That interpretive jump was not accidental. It reflected the priorities of expansionist empires trained to convert cultural difference into opportunity, then opportunity into extraction. As Spanish campaigns advanced, reports of gold among regional groups intensified the sense that a greater treasury must exist inland. Early contact and conquest operations yielded real quantities of precious objects from temples and elite spaces, which seemed to confirm the larger fantasy. But confirmation was selective. Recovering substantial wealth from one society does not prove a hidden city of inexhaustible riches nearby. Yet in conquest logic, partial success often functions as narrative fuel. If we found this much, imagine what remains. That mindset encouraged escalating expeditions and harsher campaigns. Material evidence and myth fed each other in a loop. The more gold recovered, the more officials and adventurers believed they were close to a final prize. The less they found afterward, the more they assumed the true source had been moved farther away. This made El Dorado almost impossible to disprove inside colonial systems. Administrative ambition, personal survival, and imperial rivalry all rewarded optimistic reporting. Under those conditions, uncertainty did not cool the hunt. It widened it, allowing new maps, new claims, and new invasions to be justified with old rumors dressed in fresh detail. Lake Guatavita became central because it linked legend to a real place. If ceremonies involved placing offerings in the lake, then the lake itself looked like a recoverable treasure chamber to outsiders. This belief drove repeated attempts to extract objects and even alter the lake to reach possible deposits. Spanish and later British efforts to drain or access Guatavita reflected an extractive mindset. Sacred geography was treated as a resource pit. Some artifacts were recovered, including notable Muisca goldwork that survives as important evidence today. These finds mattered historically, but they were often interpreted in distorted ways. Properly understood, they validate ritual practice and craftsmanship. Improperly framed, they were marketed as proof that a giant golden polity still waited elsewhere. So the same objects served two narratives at once, one grounded in indigenous culture, another inflamed by colonial fantasy. This dual reading explains why El Dorado remained resilient. People could point to real gold and claim the wider myth was therefore true. Yet evidence of offerings in one ceremonial context is not evidence of an entire hidden empire. The leap persisted because many wanted the conclusion before evaluating the premise. After local realities failed to match maximal expectations, El Dorado migrated geographically. The supposed location drifted across South America, repeatedly relocated into less mapped interiors. One major theater became the Guianas, where Antonio de Berrio pursued routes into difficult terrain, convinced the Golden Realm lay beyond known frontiers. These campaigns faced severe constraints: tropical disease, supply failures, river complexity, and weak logistical infrastructure. But practical barriers rarely ended the narrative. They were reframed as temporary obstacles hiding an intact prize. When Sir Walter Raleigh entered the story, imperial rivalry deepened the chase. Capturing de Berrio and launching his own effort, Raleigh tied English strategic ambition to the same treasure mythology. That move shows how adaptable El Dorado had become. It no longer belonged to one expedition line or one empire. It functioned as a transferable strategic rumor that any power could adopt to justify penetration of contested regions. In this phase, the legend was less about specific testimony and more about geopolitical leverage. Whoever reached the mythical center first might gain wealth, prestige, and territorial advantage, so uncertainty itself became a reason to keep pushing. Even failed expeditions can succeed at narrative production. Raleigh's ventures did not reveal a golden city, but published accounts and second-hand reports sustained European fascination. Among recurring claims was a great inland lake, later called Lake Parime, near which extraordinary wealth might be found. This idea became a powerful cartographic anchor. Early modern maps often mixed measured knowledge with conjecture, and once a hypothetical feature appeared repeatedly, it gained credibility through circulation. Readers saw Lake Parime on maps and assumed its existence had been confirmed, when in many cases it had only been reproduced. This is an important mechanism in myth persistence, representation masquerading as verification. The map looked objective, so the rumor looked factual. Expeditions could then be planned around a feature that had social authority but weak empirical foundation. In effect, paper geography extended the life of speculative geography. El Dorado gained endurance not only from adventurous imagination, but from administrative and scholarly ecosystems that copied uncertain claims faster than they could be tested. The legend became embedded in institutions that people trusted, making corrections slow and politically inconvenient. By the 17th century, El Dorado worked like a flexible package of beliefs: hidden abundance, incomplete mapping, and imminent breakthrough if only one more expedition was funded. That package had emotional and economic utility. For leaders returning empty-handed, it preserved reputation by recasting failure as reconnaissance. For investors, it preserved hope by redefining loss as delay. For empires, it justified continued intervention in interior regions under the banner of discovery. The model is familiar to modern audiences: high-risk ventures sustained by promises of outsized reward and narratives that immunize themselves against contradiction. If nothing is found, the target is moved, the timeline extends, and confidence is renewed. Meanwhile, local populations endure coercion, displacement, and environmental disruption. In El Dorado's case, the mythology was never just a harmless tale told in distant courts. It helped channel men, money, and military force into landscapes where indigenous societies already had systems of meaning and governance. The legend's durability therefore tells us less about a hidden city and more about how power organizes uncertainty to keep extraction projects alive even when evidence remains thin. The long decline of the El Dorado search came through cumulative knowledge rather than one dramatic debunking. As surveying improved and expeditions documented rivers, uplands, and drainage systems with greater consistency, blank areas shrank and contradictions sharpened. Features once accepted by repetition, like Lake Parime, became harder to defend against coordinated geographic evidence. In the early 19th century, Alexander von Humboldt's assessments were especially influential because they applied rigorous comparative method to long-standing claims. His conclusion that Lake Parime was mythical undermined one of the strongest late anchors of the Golden City narrative. More broadly, this moment reflects a change in epistemic standards. Prestige and repetition no longer outweighed systematic observation. Repeated non-findings started to count as meaningful evidence against a claim rather than mere bad luck. That transition did not erase colonial damage already done, but it altered the terms of legitimacy for future assertions. El Dorado as mappable destination lost institutional credibility. Still, legends rarely disappear at the pace of data. Cultural imagination often outlives geographic correction, carrying symbols forward long after factual claims have collapsed. Once El Dorado weakened as literal geography, it flourished as metaphor. Writers and philosophers used it to stage questions about greed, innocence, empire, and the gap between promise and reality. In satire and fiction, a golden place could expose the absurdities of European politics or the moral failures of colonial ambition. That literary afterlife helped detach the name from its Muisca roots. Over time, El Dorado became shorthand for any impossible windfall, from frontier dreams to speculative booms. But this symbolic flexibility carries risk. When the legend is retold without historical grounding, it can repeat the original erasure by turning indigenous culture into decorative preface for outsider adventure. A more responsible narrative keeps both layers visible. Yes, there was a powerful myth that shaped exploration and art, and yes, beneath it were real communities, sacred practices, and violent colonial transformations. Holding that tension improves the story rather than flattening it. It restores agency to the people whose world generated the misunderstood ritual and clarifies that the greatest treasure sought by empires was never waiting in a hidden city. It was projected there by desire. So what does El Dorado teach us now? First, myths become dangerous when they align with incentives. A misunderstood ceremony might have remained a footnote, but attached to imperial competition and economic ambition, it became a centuries-long project. Second, evidence can be real and still be misused. Gold objects from Lake Guatavita are authentic historical artifacts. They do not prove a continental city of inexhaustible wealth. Third, institutions can amplify uncertainty when repetition replaces verification. Maps, reports, and official narratives can make speculation look solid long enough to direct policy and violence. Finally, correction matters, but often arrives after harm. By the time improved geography and scientific scrutiny dissolved core claims, generations had already acted on them. That pattern is not confined to the early modern world. It appears whenever dramatic stories promise extraordinary reward and critical questions are postponed. Who gains if we believe this? What would disconfirm it? Whose interpretation is being centered? El Dorado endures because it is more than a legend of gold. It is a case study in how ambition converts ambiguity into certainty, and certainty into action, long before truth catches up. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.